Hello, friends, and welcome to Led to Gold, the podcast devoted to discussing all things growth and wellness. So happy to have you here today. If you've never been here before, I really want to welcome you in and just give you an extra thanks for stopping by. I hope you love it. I hope that there is something that serves you in this episode or any others that you might wander off to. And if you are here returning for another episode also, thank you so much for coming back. Really appreciate it. I want to just give the usual spiel right here at the beginning. If you did not already know, Led to Gold is not just a podcast. It's also a blog. I have my standard website, which I always have linked in the show notes. It's ledtogold.blog, super duper easy. That is where you can easily find all of my things, all of the things that I do. But as of late, I'm also on Substack. I have been kind of toying around with it for the past couple of months, just getting it exactly how I want it. So that is finally set up and ready to go. If you are more of a Substack person at this time and it's easier for you to keep all of your blog babes in one place, you can find me there too. So the link for that is also in the show notes. Ledtogold.blog, the main website, is always my home base. So if you want to subscribe to that, you will get only one monthly newsletter from me, just rounding up everything that has been coming out more recently. I've never really liked the way that Substack, or really any particular like mailing website, whatever, sends an email out to everybody the second that anything gets posted. I don't like that. So even if you do subscribe on Substack, you're only going to get my monthly newsletter. So just want to put that out there. If you want to stay up to date on everything, I do truly only send it out once a month. It's always at the beginning of every new astrological season. So other little goodies that come with that are an exclusive monthly playlist that you can listen to on any streaming platform. And I always like to kind of custom make those for the vibe of whatever season we're entering in. So if that interests you, go subscribe. You can do any of those things with the links in the show notes below. The very last thing I will say, and I think all podcasters say this, but we say it because it's true. If you like this episode, if you have liked any episodes in the past, gotten something out of them, it really truly means the world if you could take a second to rate the show on whatever platform you're using to listen to it, and or share it with a friend who you think would like it, because podcasting really does not follow the same sort of potentially get lucky algorithm that social media does. The only thing that really helps with growth is ratings. So that is something that does get the show out there a little bit more. If you haven't already, it really would mean the world and make a huge difference. So thank you so much for doing so. If you do all of those things, if you do none of those things, again, I'm just really happy to have you here. And today, I'm speaking directly to my anxious avoidant girlies. You don't have to be a girl. My anxious avoidant people. Okay, where are you? Hello, I'm talking to you today. I'm going to be so honest. I actually really have never subscribed to the anxious attachment style conversation. That was a really big thing in the wellness space a couple years ago. I still see it every now and again, but I've never really tried to label myself in any which way. I don't really know a lot about the intricacies. I mean, I think the titles kind of stand for themselves. You know, if you are anxiously attached versus avoidant, you're going to have different traits, and they're kind of in the definition, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm not an expert on attachment styles, but I do know that I definitely have some traits that are a little bit more associated with the avoidant style. And especially, I know that I hate confrontation. I hate it so much, even after years and years of working on it, and definitely like improving in my ability to confront hard things or tell people how I honestly feel or state a boundary or whatever the situation might be. it's still something that I hate, and it sucks, and it makes me nervous every single time that I have to confront something. I've gotten a lot better. I have grown a lot. I have learned a lot of things in my very overt desire to get better with confrontation. I feel like at this point I can kind of speak from the scar of the many, many times that I've had to do confrontation that I didn't want to do versus the wound itself. You know, I'm no longer in a place where like I don't know how to confront people. So it is something that I would like to talk about because it has been a very long-standing issue in my own life. And I know that a lot of us struggle with how to confront others. And even just saying that and having said the word confront like 10 times already, it feels intimidating and it feels aggressive. I don't want anybody to get it twisted. When I say the word confrontation, I don't mean immediate conflict, immediate fighting, immediate like bad blood. That's not what I'm getting at all with this conversation. So don't turn away just yet. What I ultimately mean is in life, always, there are going to be situations and interactions with others that we don't like, that rub us the wrong way, that make us uncomfortable. And I do think, maybe this is a hot take, that people are losing their ability, especially as we get, you know, new generations coming into adulthood, coming into themselves, in having grown up in a world that was so online and disconnected. We are, I think, losing our ability to do this with grace. And we are losing our ability to mend relationships when they get difficult. This is definitely something that has been talked about in the public sphere as of late, where we're not very used to having to work through hard things anymore because everything is so built around convenience. Everything is so optimized that the second anything becomes difficult, and that includes our relationships, a lot of us, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of us tend to default to the easier option, which is to just drop it, to ignore it. At the very least, to not discuss how we feel about something because it's just easier. We would rather avoid the conflict. We don't want to get in a fight. We don't want the other person to hate us or think we're high maintenance. So at the very least, we're going to just ignore our own feelings and never address it. And at worst, we're going to ghost somebody who may have actually been a really great person to have in our lives. I've had so many conversations with friends about this, but I have had multiple people in my life admit that when somebody does something to them that they don't like, maybe a couple of times over, they literally would just rather stop talking to them altogether than try to mend the relationship. And I think that that's really sad. So I want to talk about regulating our nervous systems because I feel like I've been talking a lot about this lately too. That is such a big reason in the modern day, in our day and age, in the year of our Lord, 2026. That's a huge reason why so much of this work becomes harder because our nervous systems are shot. We are just walking around every single day when clearly nothing is fine, like everything's fine. And that takes a huge toll. So we have to start there. But beyond that, I want to also get into some things that I think are overlooked when we're talking about resolving conflict or resolving something in a relationship or between a group of people that is unspoken or building up a resentment, right? There's so much to get into here, but I really do think that it's worth having a conversation around because this is becoming a dying art. And I don't like that. I don't want that to be the case. I want to be able to talk to the people that I love about when somebody does something that hurts me. And again, as I've said, I do think in time and with a lot of practice, I've gotten much, much better at being able to do that. But it hasn't come without mistakes. And that's also part of what we're going to get into today. Here's the thing that I want to just center the conversation around. If we are avoidant, And I don't necessarily mean the attachment style. I just mean if our default when something goes wrong or when somebody, again, does something that we don't like, says something that makes us upset, if our default is to avoid the conversation, then a lot of times we are making our lives harder than it needs to be. This is really what made me start wanting to do work around conflict resolution within my own life, because I could feel that I was unhappy in a lot of social situations, mostly in work, but in some friendships too. It would be so infuriating to me, and I would be mad at myself for not speaking up about something. It almost had more to do with my response than the thing that the person initially said or did. I would be more upset that I couldn't just get over whatever fear that I had around saying something, that now the thing has been left unsaid. Now I just have to carry on like nothing ever happened, and resentment might build up, or this person is not going to know that they have wronged me or that they have done something to upset me. And that's not fair to anybody. I'm going to be very vulnerable and share a couple of stories here to just center in on what I mean by this. And if you relate to any of this, then this is definitely the conversation for you. Okay. When I was a freshman in college, I was 19, I was living with somebody who is still one of my best friends. I love her to death. She was such an amazing roommate and still to this day, such an amazing friend. Like, love her to death. And in college, early in college, she was dating this guy that I hated. And like, I think we can all relate to this, especially the women listening. Like, you know, when you know a woman who is just honestly perfect and beautiful and smart and has a good head on her shoulders, self-responsible, literally like the full fucking package. Okay. That's what my roommate was. And in my honest opinion, this man could not touch her. Like, he was just whiny and like annoying and such a, I don't know, had a lot of thoughts about him. And there was this one particular incident where he was acting particularly insecure and upset that, you know, we wanted to go out together. And she came back after they talked and complained about it. Me and a couple of other people in the room advised her to like maybe break up with him. Maybe he's not the one for you. You're too good for him. Run away, please. We thought maybe she would, but then I remember it was like a couple days after that. It was like after the weekend had ended. They came back to the apartment, to the dorm. He was with her and she had this huge bundle of flowers. And she was like, look at these flowers that my boyfriend gave me. And I was like, oh, cute. This is terrible. Okay. This is really, I'm embarrassed to admit this. My reaction to this was that I tweeted about it. It was 2015, but I tweeted about it and I said something along the lines of, your shitty boyfriend bringing you flowers after being a shitty boyfriend doesn't make him any less shitty. Sorry. And, you know, I stand by that. I think that's true. But what I didn't know was that she followed me on Twitter. I didn't know. And I remember maybe another day or two had gone by and we were both like sitting at our desks doing homework in the dorm and we started to talk and she was just like, hey, that wasn't cool. I really don't appreciate that you tweeted about that. I wish you would have just said something to me. And I was fucking mortified because I loved her so much and I wanted the best for her. And I fully was just like, oh my God, dude, that's so embarrassing. And I know that that's not even a good excuse. I genuinely didn't know you followed me, but that doesn't make up for it. Like I should not have done that. I'm so sorry. My instant reaction when something like this happens is to grovel. I wanted to quite literally get on my hands and knees and like beg for her forgiveness and cry to her and be like, I'm so fucking sorry. I'm a horrible person. But I didn't need to do that because her being the perfect angel woman she is was like, hey, it's all good. Just, let's communicate next time. Just let's have a dialogue. Let's talk. I forgive you. And that was the end of it. Now, while I would love to say that from that moment, I knew how to start a dialogue about something that bothered me because I was modeled it so perfectly by my freshman roommate, that's not the case because just like a few weeks ago, I was traveling with a bunch of friends and we had a little bit of a hiccup where some things were not being communicated, and I literally had it in my head that when we got back to the hotel room, I was going to shut the door and be like, okay, do we all just need to have a little collective cry or what's good? Because the energy is off. Everyone's acting weird. Let's talk. But I didn't do that. So the energy festered and it got worse and it got more awkward. And it became a thing that somebody else in the group had to bring up because I was too afraid to do it. But that instance was, for me, the final nail in the coffin to decide, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not interested in letting energy get sour and stagnant and shitty because I am too afraid to address it. Because, like my freshman roommate taught me, this does not need to be hard. This does not need to be a conversation that hinges the entire relationship on it. Now, it makes complete sense that so many of us are afraid of that possibility because sometimes they do go south. If any of us grew up in households where that was how conflict got solved, was by screaming at each other or by slamming doors or by somebody always crying, yeah, it's gonna feel scary to try to resolve any amount of conflict. And saying that out loud honestly validates it for me because that was the type of house that I grew up in. Conflict was screaming, and most arguments ended in fights or somebody not speaking to somebody else for the next 24 hours. So it makes sense, and I want to validate that. It makes sense that so many of us have such a hard time with this because we grew up in environments where it wasn't okay to bring these things up. Or maybe not even that. Maybe it was okay. You were just going to be met with the most extreme emotions. But as adults who are, even if you don't consider yourself to be doing the work of reparenting yourself, in a way, doing this work, you are reparenting yourself. You are rediscovering what it means to be in conflict with other people. And I would like to challenge even the definition or the connotation that we have around the word conflict. Like I said at the very beginning, conflict or confrontation, those words don't need to mean war. They don't need to mean violence or intimidation or aggression. They can simply just be two people talking to each other about something, working out a struggle. It can really, really be that simple. So with these two little stories and endless more in between the years under my belt, I want to get into the things that I have learned and the things that I now hold myself to, where maybe I won't always be perfect, but these are kind of the guidelines that I want to follow and I want to keep in mind whenever there is a conflict or something that needs to be spoken through with somebody else that can just help us ground. Because a lot goes into it. And again, a lot of us have been through childhoods where conflict was very scary and resulted in less than ideal situations, right? Often making things worse. Number one, before you even talk, before you even have the conversation that you know you need to have, You need to get your nervous system right. I know I have been talking a lot about the nervous system lately, but it's only because it really kind of is the core of everything, especially doing the work around emotions. You have to get your nervous system right. The reason that most conflict conversations go sideways isn't exactly like what's being said within them. We especially know this if we have grown up in the environments that made this difficult. It's more so that at least one person is already in fight or flight mode before the first word even leaves their mouth. Think about it like this too. Like if you were getting in conflict with your parents, if you were fighting with your parents as a young person, it's probably likely that one or both of you were already upset about something that happened, and nobody has learned in that environment how to breathe, how to center, how to calm themselves before they hash it out. I've seen some really great parenting videos on social media as of late where it was a mother talking to her child who was actively tantruming and just calmly reminding him, you need to use your calm voice before you ask me for what you want, because I will not listen to you if you're screaming at me. When you're screaming, I don't want to listen to you because that feels mean. So use your calm voice, and if you need to take a few minutes to find it, that's okay. But I will not give you what you want, and I will not listen to what you're saying until you can say it in a calm voice. Period. Great parenting, in my opinion. It's the same idea here. And there are things that we can do to get ourselves in that mode, even if we're kind of like actively in the middle of an argument, or if we sense that whatever interaction we're having is going to go south. We can say a couple of things. I actually use this with students quite frequently because, again, as I've talked about, and as I'm sure you know, teaching is really overstimulating, especially teaching high school. And it's pretty frequent that I will have kids doing something or a kid doing something that is really, really, really annoying, or I'm already overstimulated and now I have to deal with this behavior. So oftentimes when that happens, I don't react or have a conversation with that kid in that moment. I will usually wait either until the end of that class period or even until the next time I see them to be like, hey, that thing that happened last class really wasn't okay. We need to talk about some alternative decisions that could have been made there. Something like that. Really, the generic advice is this. You can use the 24-hour rule. You can even use the 5-minute rule. I've done this with my husband too, where you know things are getting heated. If you can feel, even for just a second within yourself in that moment, that like you're getting overstimulated or you're getting really angry, heightened, whatever, that is an opportunity for you to be like, hey, I would love to continue this conversation, but I can feel myself getting really upset. I'm going to go take a shower and we can revisit this in a minute. Whatever you need to do, just whatever the situation allows for, give yourself a couple of minutes or even a full day or two to revisit. That is completely allowed. Pay extra attention to any like physical symptoms that you are experiencing in that moment. I think a lot of us really can tell when we are heightened or too overstimulated or too overwhelmed to be having a productive conversation about a conflict. But really, truly, some of the things to just look out for are if you start feeling hot, or if you are having shallowed breathing or a clenched jaw. Anything like that that signals to your brain like, oh, angry. Take a step back. Take a step back. Take the time that you need. And in that time, know that it's not all about like saying the perfect words or getting it out perfectly or not being afraid to have the conversation. It's not about that. It's just about taking space and allowing yourself time to calm down so that you can come back to it a little bit more fresh and a little bit more clear on what it is that you need to ask for or talk about. The general goal, I think, is to wait until you feel grounded enough that you can hear the other person rather than just waiting for your turn to speak or your turn to defend yourself. So if you are in a headspace where you're like, okay, I am calm enough and I am regulated enough that I can not only express what I need, but I can hear what they're thinking too. And I can actively empathize and listen to the things that they're saying and take it into consideration. That's when you're ready to have the conversation. So pay attention to those things anytime that something needs to be said. Okay, step 2, and this is something that I have talked about before on the show, but I really, really think that it is the crux of good conflict resolution. And this is something that I have more been able to practice. At this point, I am very good at doing this with my students, and I would like to think I'm very good at doing this with my friends and relationships as well, because it is true. And I always want the other person to know right at the beginning, before anything else is said, I am not bringing this to you because I hate you or because I don't want to be your friend or want to be in relationship with you anymore. No, I'm bringing this to you because I love you and because I want our relationship to stay how it is and to stay intact and even strengthen from this conversation. Really, ultimately, we want to start from love in any conflict resolution, especially, obviously, if it's somebody that you really care about. If it's your partner, if it's your best friend and something needs to be said, and oftentimes things will need to be said. If you especially know that that person is self-conscious or will maybe be equally avoidant and run away from the conversation, this is the reframe that separates ultimate resolution from either fight or flight. So before you even open your mouth, you can also ask yourself this. Do I actually want this relationship to come out of this intact? And if yes, which I would think is the majority of the case for what we're talking about here, then this has to be the posture that you lead with. Visibly, right? Not even just saying it with your words. If you're in person with this person, that comes through in your body language too. It comes through in your tone of voice. So you really don't want to speak from anger, even if you are angry. This is also part of why step 1 is so important, like getting regulated. You want to speak in a calm voice. Again, a thing that I think about with my students a lot is they are very, very resistant to having a conversation with a teacher if they think that I'm going to attack them, right? Because in that moment too, I'm the person in power. I'm the person that has authority over them. And especially when you have to like pull them out of the classroom, which is what I prefer to do, that is immediately intimidating. They think, oh my God, I'm in trouble. Oh my God, she's going to like tell somebody. She's going to call my mom. She's whatever. No, I'm going to pull you out into the hallway so we can have a private space to talk. And then I'm just going to talk to you just like I'm talking right now. It is very, very rare that I use a more aggressive tone with a kid. Very rare. And it's because almost certainly, no matter who the kid is or what they did, I don't hate them and I want to maintain a relationship with them because they still have to be in my classroom and they still have to learn from me and we still need to share that space. So again, extremely rare that I'm ever going to come at a student from anything other than a place of love and respect, because especially in that situation, we have no choice but to maintain this relationship. If it were a more close friend or your partner or whoever, that's even more so the case. Like, we are trying to maintain a relationship. So starting with that, and I mean before you say anything, saying, I'm bringing this up because I care about us and because I want this relationship to last. That changes everything about the conversation. It changes how the other person receives the things that you're saying, because right off the bat, they know why you're bringing it up. It lands completely differently than the same words coming from a place of grievance or annoyance, right? So very, very intentionally, that is how any conflict resolution with someone you love should start, because you love them. I already talked about this a little bit, but step 3 or part 3 of this conversation is definitely to be as calm and casual about the grievance as you can possibly be. This does not need to be a brawl, even if it feels like it's going to be one. Again, this comes back to most likely our childhood rememberings of more traumatizing conflicts. If all your family ever did was scream and cry and back each other into corners when there was an argument to be had, then of course, every time you now feel like you need to have a hard conversation, it's going to feel like you're about to get in a fight. But that is not how real adults argue. That is not how healthy relationships and healthy partnerships have arguments. It can be calm. Depending on the situation, of course. I know there are some things where it's like, yes, you are completely valid in getting angry and maybe even raising your voice a little bit. But like, for most things where a conversation needs to be had, it does not need to involve anybody raising their voice, anybody getting heightened, any aggression at all. You can just say the thing that's bothering you, point blank, period. Explain what happened from your point of view, and then let them respond. Most conflict avoidant people, most avoidant people in general, are going to, as we've said, catastrophize any conversation before it even happens. And a lot of times, I didn't even mention this, but like when we have grown up in those spaces, a lot of us have already mentally rehearsed the worst version of whatever conversation needs to happen. And we've rehearsed it so many times that by the time we actually get to the point of needing to have it, we're going to perform this drama that the other person didn't even know was going to be part of it. Like, you know what I mean? There's a lot of times this pent up idea or this sense of what needs to be said or what's going to be said, or how you have to specifically say the thing so that they'll get it because you've already envisioned that they're thinking a certain way and that they believe certain things about you. Whoa. We got to take a step back, because all of that is a fabrication that we have made up in our minds. All of that is just in our minds. And that's not our fault, right? Especially because maybe in our past, this hasn't gone so well. It's not our fault, but it is something that we need to be aware of. And it is something that we probably need to work through, if that is why we are afraid of having the conversation, because we think that they're thinking something, or we think that they're going to respond in a certain way. You don't know what they're thinking, and you don't know what they're going to do. So as best as you can, get that out of your brain and just say what needs to be said. Pivoting slightly to romantic partnerships here for a second, because I have been seeing more of this on social media lately, and I love it. And I think it's great. This is actually something that I've kind of tried to practice too in my relationship, and I honestly want to do more of it. When you can actually be kind of unserious in arguments. Again, something that we're not taught, something that we don't visualize, especially if we grew up in environments where that was not the case. But arguments don't need to be super serious and heavy and dramatic and full of angst. They don't. I've seen couples say that they actually schedule when they're going to argue, which might sound crazy to some of us. It's definitely a concept that takes a little getting used to, but it makes so much sense. If you kind of like wait, a week or two, and you have this scheduled time every week or two where it's like, all right, everything that has bothered me, I'm going to let it out. And even that maybe might not work for some people, but that is a way to kind of just like soften the blow a little bit, because it's like you already know that it's coming. You're already prepared to have the conversation about whatever. Now, that requires a good amount of emotional maturity from both parties, but still, it could be an effective way to have your arguments. Even more unserious than that would be, I've seen this, people saying that when they argue, they put on party hats, or they are like touching each other's legs while they're talking, or they have to be saying their grievance in an accent or something like that. I've seen couples do all of these various like kind of silly things to ease the tension. And while some people may think, okay, well, that just cheapens whatever they're trying to say, I don't think so. I think it actually is quite helpful when you have a big fear around conflict and you need something to kind of just bring you both back down to earth and recognize and remember that you're on the same team. You're just trying to tackle a problem together. Some of these can actually be really effective. I personally love the party hat idea. I think I might try that. In romantic relationships especially, being able to bring something up with levity and warmth, maybe even a little bit of humor, is actually, I think, one of the most sophisticated relationship skills there is. Even if it seems a little silly and cheeky and dumb, it's actually pretty helpful. Lightness does not minimize the conversation, and it doesn't minimize the importance of what anybody is trying to say. It's literally just refusing to let the conversation become bigger than it needs to be. And I think that's the ultimate takeaway, especially for us anxious, avoidant people, is that, again, this isn't a brawl. This isn't a war. Every single argument does not need to hinge on whether or not a relationship is going to last, even if it feels that way. We have been brought up to think it needs to be that way, but it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't have to be that serious or that deep. All right, number 4. There doesn't need to be a boundary or an ultimatum when you're arguing or having a conflict with somebody. This I bring up because it has become such a buzzword. Having boundaries, stating boundaries, whatever. But that doesn't need to be a part of the conversation. In fact, even more so, you should be able to show up imperfectly. And the other person should be able to make space for that. There's a lot of directions I could take with this part of the conversation, but ultimately, I think the bottom line for this part 4 is really just to say you can allow yourself to be messy, because you almost certainly will be, especially if this is hard for you. You're gonna stumble over your words. You're gonna maybe be a little bit more aggressive than you'd like to be because you're feeling pent up. Yeah, even after doing all of the nervous system work that you could possibly do, even after taking 2 full days to have this conversation, you might still not be perfectly like in your body and present and knowing what you're gonna say. And you shouldn't need to, because what's more important is just having the conversation and getting it out there. All of this, I think, pushes back on the boundary discourse in a more useful way than how we are now so used to talking about boundaries. Not every conflict needs a formal resolution. We don't need to shake on anything. We don't need to come to terms with how we're going to move on from this or how things are going to be different post this conversation. There doesn't need to be a stated consequence for if something gets breached, right? Sometimes it's just, I felt this thing, I named it to you, we talked about it, we can move on. Giving yourself permission to be clumsy, to be a little messy, to be imperfect in this conversation, to like not have the perfect I statement, we statement, you statement, like a lot of this is online now. especially involving like the boundary conversation. We can stumble over our words. It's actually making it more likely that you're going to have the conversation at all. Again, I go back to step 1, because part of getting your nervous system right, part of feeling safe enough to have this conversation is going to be allowing yourself to mess up, because you're allowed, period. When I had my little conflict over this friend trip, I very much thought about this piece of it, because it was very well facilitated. I think everybody was very honest and open, but even still in that moment, and I didn't let it ruin anything for me. I didn't let it stop me from saying what I needed to say. But in that moment, I'm thinking, like, as I'm talking, there's probably a better way I could say this. I could probably be calmer. I could probably explain myself better. I could probably stop giving so many caveats, or stop, apologizing for things that I've done when we're talking about you right now, if that makes sense. Imperfect. It's imperfect. And that's okay, because you know what? The conversation was had and then things got better. And that's really all that matters. Like, there was no boundary set. There was no, if you do this again, I'm going to do this. No, because I think that's pretty inauthentic anyway. It just doesn't feel human. It doesn't feel real to have to instill that into every single conflict resolution conversation, because it doesn't make sense for every single conflict resolution conversation, right? We can just rant and get it out and cry a little bit and hug at the end and be like, okay, are we good? Yeah, we're good. Okay, cool. End of story. That's how I would prefer to get these things done. That was a shorter one, but here's my last one. And the last one is probably the hardest one for most of us who have been identified in this conversation as anxious avoidant. Number 5 is don't psych yourself out. Don't. Now is always the best time, or as soon as possible. As soon as possible is better than 2 months from now. 2 months from now is better than not at all. But still, now is the best time. We really, I think, need to ground this in kind of another personal take, because time and time again, I have let things fester. I'm sure we all have. But this is particularly where I am most self-conscious with my own conflict resolution skills, because yes, there are definitely times where we do need to take a beat. We've already addressed that in step 1. Step 1 is before anything else in this conversation. You might need to take 24 hours. You might need to take 48 hours. You might need to say to the other person, hey, like, I'm really not in a good headspace to be having this conversation right now. Can we get back to it? I will be here for you. I will hear whatever you need to say. I just need a little bit of time. Cool. Great. Just make sure that you get back to it as soon as possible. Because if you don't, and again, I'm speaking from experience, if you don't, resentment is almost certainly going to build. You're going to assume that the other person is thinking or saying certain things about you or about this conversation that hasn't happened yet. You're going to assume that they feel a certain way. But you don't know because you haven't talked to them. Meanwhile, while you're assuming all of these things about them, you and yourself are probably going to be building up more reasons to be upset. You're going to continue to be upset with yourself for not having the conversation that you know needs to be had. This is a recipe for, I won't say disaster, but definitely things being harder than they have to be. Because if we have had many, many months between whatever the situation was and the conversation itself, first off, all of the things I just said. Second off, it's now been so long that you might not even remember the key things that you wanted to bring up. It might not feel that severe to the other person who wronged you. They are probably more likely to pull the, well, I don't remember it that way. Oh, I don't think it happened that way. I don't think you're remembering that correctly. No, I mean, because this is how I remember it. All of this is bad. All of this is bad. The longer you wait, the more the original issue calcifies into a story. And we're not here to talk about a story. We're not here to talk about, well, I remember it like this. Oh, but you remember it like that. Well, I don't really know because it's been, no. Nope. This thing happened. So if it happened and we want to be able to talk about it fresh, we need to talk about it sooner rather than later. Even more so, as all of this potentially builds up, if we're waiting too long, the other person may have no idea that anything is wrong. Because if you haven't said anything, if you haven't even hinted at the idea that like, hey, I don't like this, or I'm feeling weird about this, we need to talk. If you haven't said anything, then they don't know. And I know it hurts to hear this, but that's not their fault. They did something that you didn't like, but the fact that you didn't say anything about them doing it, that's not their fault. You can't blame them for not knowing that you're upset because you didn't say anything. Pointing at myself here because I've done this time and time again. By the time you might finally bring it up, you're not really just addressing the incident anymore, because now you also have to address the fact that you waited so long to tell them. That might bring up a whole host of questions for them. You're addressing the incident plus whatever span of time of silent narrative building. No, you don't necessarily need to get into specifics of like, well, I'm sure you're thinking this, or like, whatever. You don't need to get into that. But the conversation that could have just been like a little bit of a speed bump, a little bit of a, obstacle, has now become a full-blown block. Like a full-blown, not good. Even though it's scary, even though we really don't want to, even though we'd really rather not, now is almost always better. Even when it feels really hard, bringing it up now is almost always better. Always. So that's really all the advice that I have on trying to just get through these little speed bumps. Hopefully they're just little speed bumps and they haven't turned into full-blown roadblocks. But none of this makes conflict easier. I do want to name that. I think over time, if we do practice some of this or all of this, it will get better. My personal goal is to feel so comfortable with conflict that I don't even need to work up to having a conversation anymore. I just think that it's still worth saying this isn't easy. A lot of us have largely forgotten how to do this. A lot of us never really learned in the first place how to do this, or we were shown abysmal examples of how to have conflict resolution, because I don't know about y'all, but that conflict never really got resolved. It probably just festered and got worse and worse and worse every single time because communication was not the strong suit of my household. But I digress. It's never going to be super easy for people who grew up this way or who are wired this way. But the alternative isn't neutrality, right? We don't want to remain neutral or remain silent in the face of something needing to be said. That's not the opposite of the things that we may have grown up seeing. It might feel that way, but it's not. I hope that makes sense. But avoidance has its own cost. I think we've talked about that pretty extensively here. And it compounds really quietly. That in a lot of ways can end up being more detrimental and more damaging than the screaming, crying, yelling. Neither are good, but they're both pretty bad in their own ways. The relationships that last or that will last are not the ones where either nothing ever goes wrong or we're just pretending that nothing's ever going wrong. I've had my fair share of those too, where like it was never really that bad. It was never really something that like needed to be talked about, but there were still these little teeny tiny little things along the way that compounds and calcifies too. It's important to remember that. I'm not saying you need to pick apart every single teeny tiny thing that somebody else does that you don't like. That's not where I'm going with this, because that can also just like be annoying. But if something needs to be said, say it. And it doesn't need to be a whole big deal. Just say it. Just say it. Relationships that last are going to be the ones where both people decide that working through whatever it is was worth more than the temporary comfort of not saying anything at all. None of us need to be fearless. That is not a requirement for good conflict resolution. It's not likely that I'll ever get to that point where it doesn't scare me at all to bring something up. But we just need to be willing to be a little uncomfortable on behalf of something that we care about. We need to be a little uncomfortable. We need to put ourselves in these slightly uncomfortable positions because the friendship or the relationship matters more than being temporarily uncomfortable or feeling unsafe for a brief moment of time. That's it. That is the entire practice. Just kind of getting over it and doing it because you love the person. That's it. So with that, I really want to pull today's We're Not Really Strangers card from the forgiveness pack, because I feel like forgiveness is also a big kind of unspoken piece to this whole conversation. Not only are you forgiving this person for doing something or saying something that you didn't like, or that made you uncomfortable or temporarily halted the friendship, you're also forgiving yourself for however many times that you weren't able to meet that person in a dialogue. That's honestly probably the harder thing. In fact, I know that's the harder thing. That's definitely the harder thing, because I, to this day, beat myself up over, oh, why couldn't I have just closed the hotel room door and been like, guys, let's cry about it. It's not even that big a deal. Let's just have a little cry because I can tell that things are off. For some reason, that was too scary to do. I don't know why. But I'm going to choose to forgive myself for not being able to do it, because all I can do is work from that point and try to do better next time. And I will. And I hope you will too. Forgiveness is important. Let's pull a little card and see what we can get into with it. Ooh, okay. Here it is. Is there someone in your life you've yet to forgive? If so, why? Okay. Brutally honest. Yes. I mean, there's probably several people, but the first one that comes to mind for me is this coworker that I had years ago who really, really made my life bad. I'm just going to be honest. I hated working with that person. I really struggled to communicate with them. I struggled to get them to see where I was coming from. I felt like every interaction that we did have was an attack and passive aggressive. And that was extremely hard to forgive. I mean, clearly, because I still haven't forgiven this person, even though it's been years and I don't work with them anymore. They're not even at my school anymore. And I probably never need to interact with them ever again. Probably will never have to. I just find it really hard to forgive people who clearly don't respect me. And again, brutal honesty, I don't know if I need to forgive that person. I don't know if that requires me to forgive. Can I be like, okay, cool, this person's out of my life and I don't really need to worry about it and I should probably resent them less? Sure. But I think I stand by not forgiving them for treating me like shit, because they did. And I don't look back on a single interaction that we had as positive, even when I think they were trying to smooth things over or trying to be friendly. It just didn't come off that way to me. It came off as like, I'd rather you just apologize. So that's my honest answer. I never forgave them because they were really, really horrible to communicate with and never apologized for how they treated me. To their credit, it's possible, because this person was the first person who really made me think about me needing to be more assertive. So honestly, in a way, they've kind of inspired this episode. But I definitely, after working with them, was like thinking about how to stand up for myself better and how to not play the role of like young girl who's cool with everything, because I think I definitely did that a little bit too much. And I think that they took advantage of that and like walked all over me to a degree. So yeah, I don't feel like it's necessary to forgive that, but I will forgive myself for how I sort of let them do that and get away with it. And I probably never really made my feelings super, super known because I just wanted to be cool. But I don't think I do that anymore. So yay for growth. But how about you? Is there anybody in your life that you have yet to forgive? And if so, why? Doesn't mean you need to. But if you feel like sharing, or if you feel like any feedback, any comments, any questions that you have from this episode that you would like to continue further, my Instagram DMs are always open and I would love to hear from you. So if that interests you at all, reach out to me. I would genuinely love that. Thank you so much again for being here. I really, really appreciate it. And I love, love, love being able to have these conversations. So yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts. And if not, until next time, I will see you here on the podcast in another 2 weeks. And if you want something in the meantime, look out next Monday. There will be a new blog post, both on leadtogold.blog and on my Substack. So wherever you prefer to read it, you can do that. All right. I love you so much. Talk soon. Bye.